Hi everyone, and welcome to the Design VC, the show where design meets business and creativity meets capital. And I'm your host, Andy Budd. Each week, I'll be talking to founders, investors, and designers about the role design plays in the world of startups. And today, I'm really excited to be joined by Luke Wroblewski, Managing Director and Head of Product at Sutter Hill Ventures. Luke was one of the early pioneers of UX and interaction design, thinking deeply about things like form design, shopping cart interaction, and the early mobile web. And he wrote 3 popular books on the subject that really helped define the craft. He's led design at companies like Yahoo and Google, has started 2 startups, BagCheck and Polar, and is now working on the venture side of things. So Luke, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Really, grateful you could come on and really looking forward to talking. You've had a really amazing career. But for people that maybe aren't kind of as familiar as I am with the early days, could you maybe just go back to sort of explain how you got into design in the first place and how you came to be working at one of your first sort of seminal roles at Yahoo?
Yeah. So, ancient history at this point, but I was at the University of Illinois when the first graphical web browser came out. That was NCSA Mosaic. And I got an internship at NCSA, which was the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, if you can believe that term. And in the very, very early stages of the web, it was all like basically science research. So we were trying to do things like allow earthquake researchers to control shake tables in a web browser. We were building interfaces for scientists to share research about stitching together clusters of back then, CPUs or whatever they were. And so that's kind of where things kicked off. And I just happened to be in the right time, right place. Because if you go back to the mid 90s, there was no user experience design. In fact, there was really no interface design, right? You had ergonomics, which I actually took ergonomics classes in the School of Aviation, if you can believe that. I kind of learned about IA from the School of Library and Information Sciences, which was about like filing books and stuff, and graphic design classes and computer science classes. So back then, I really had to stitch it all together. And like I say, there was no umbrella term for any of these things. People were just piecing it all from parts. But the nice thing about being at NCSA was when the browser became Netscape Navigator, because the team that built that, Mark Andreessen and folks, went over to Silicon Valley, they would often come back and recruit. So to answer the question of like how I got to Yahoo, eBay was out there recruiting, PayPal was out there recruiting, Netscape was out there recruiting. And after a while, I finally said, okay, I really need to make my way over to where all this stuff is going on. And so I took an offer at eBay, spent about 2.5 years there doing design, building new products, and then shifted over to Yahoo during another pretty fun period, which was the whole Web 2.0 thing. So if you remember like Flickr, Delicious, and all those kinds of worlds, that was the time I spent a lot of time at Yahoo.
Well, so I didn't know the aviation background. That's fascinating. I actually have a degree in aeronautical engineering, so there might be some kind of weird overlap there. But at the time when you joined Yahoo, I mean, people won't think of Yahoo now as being like cutting edge, but they were one of the biggest, most exciting tech companies around. So what was it like being at the sort of the heart of the internet during its sort of most formative time?
The early stages were amazingly fun. We built brand new products, like we built the first video search product. We were iterating on search when search was kind of the paradigm changing thing. And, ancient history now, but the race between Yahoo and Google was actually quite competitive back in those days. And so we were doing a lot of things on the user experience side. Like I did the first design of video search. We overhauled image search to actually be like the image grid you now see. And a lot of the search assist stuff came from Yahoo too. But then towards the end of my tenure at Yahoo, it's both a blessing and a curse to be popular. But I was running design for the front page, which was the most popular internet page on the web. And as you can imagine, all of Yahoo's users and revenue and everything funneled through there. So I just remember there was a period in my life where I was driving into work being like, this is the day I quit. This is the day I quit. I pushed it through. We got it out there. It was fine. But I also learned an awful lot about what it takes to kind of operate at that level of scale. And, the thing that really made, just as a small example of why it was difficult, because I just say, it sucked, but we had a spreadsheet, massive spreadsheet, that at any point in time would show you the results of something like 50 different bucket tests that were on the front page as we were redesigning it. And I swear to God, nobody knew what it meant, right? Like nobody could actually understand the implications of it. But at the same time, nobody would make a decision because everybody's ass was on the line for what the output of this project would be. So that you're kind of in this like redesign and make it the next generation, but don't change any of the data, right? So kind of a very rock in the hard place type of place to be in.
Yep. Yep.
But this is a theme overall when you work in like big companies, right? If you get something out the door, you're immediately in front of hundreds of millions, nowadays almost billions of people. But the process of doing so is very, very challenging.
Yep. Yep. So I was going to ask you, obviously, after Yahoo, you went and became an entrepreneur in residence. But before I get into what that actually means, because I'd love to delve into that in detail, like you were moving from one of the biggest tech companies in the world at the time in a very senior role, like you say, managing probably the most trafficked website in the world. Like that seems like a big pivot to go from a really comfortable, well-paid executive job into going in-house in a more of a startup advisory kind of innovation capacity. So was that a challenging leap, or were you just kind of done and burnt out and looking for something else?
Well, it was awesome, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I basically, at the time, I had my first kid and had a house. So what I did financially, just to sort of enable that transition from, as you say, like cushy, well, cushy, but there's a well-paid senior role at a big internet company to basically making no salary for 2+ years. So what I did was I basically took a chunk of Yahoo stock that I had earned over my time there, sold it, put it in a bank account, and my mode of operation was when that bank account goes down to zero, I need to go do something else. But until then, I'm going to grind it out in the startup world and see where it goes. And the part that was awesome was, as I mentioned before, at Yahoo, everybody and their dog had a role to basically chime in on what we were working on. Whereas in the startup, it was effectively at the beginning just me and my co-founder Sam, who was the technology side of things. And so we were just unfettered, able to do whatever we want. And we would ship every single day, multiple times a day, as opposed to in Yahoo, we would ship in months, if not quarters, right? And so that process of launch and learn is just so fun and so rewarding and also so addictive because you're like, let's try this. Ooh, right? Let's try this. Ooh. So you're constantly learning and you're constantly improving. And once you get into that kind of cycle, you start to really see just how slow and ineffective some of these larger organization processes can be.
Absolutely makes sense. Just really quickly, like you were the first person that I met that introduced me to the term EIR, either entrepreneur in residence or executive in residence. Before that point, I hadn't come across it, and you very kindly sat me down on a trip to San Francisco, I think, and explained me what it was. Interestingly, that's how I got into venture as well. Like I did a 6-month stint as an EIR before becoming a partner at a venture fund. But for people who haven't come across the term, could you just quickly explain what it means, what it entails, and what your time as an EIR was like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different per firm, right? Like the way we do in residence roles here at Sutter is very different from what I did at Benchmark back then. But effectively, back then when we left Yahoo, right, me and Sam went and worked out of the Benchmark offices for a while. And the kind of relationship you get into, at least back then, it was we're going to give you a space to work, you're going to have an office to come into, and it's not an actual handshake deal, but roughly if what you guys come up with is something that we're interested in, we kind of have this pre-existing relationship where we would like to invest in that. They are not obligated to, and we're not obligated to take their money, right? But it just sort of sets up a closer relationship between folks that are planning on doing something and a venture capital firm that would be interested in backing them when and if they do so. The nice thing about it is we had a place to work that was really posh, and then the bad thing about it was we had a place to work that was really posh. And I have this underlying kind of notion that you can't feel like you've made it when you have a startup. You really need to feel like you got to grind and get out of the circumstances you're in. So we left after a couple months and we went over and took a back desk in the Fry's Electronics Center office that Cloudera had. So we went from like the nicest VC building on Sand Hill Road, or one of the nicer buildings over there, to like complete dump where we just had a corner, surrounded by who knows what was going on. But it was like super important for us to just not feel like we were already established, right? Needed to feel like we had nothing and we needed to create something.
I think that makes a ton of sense. I think you can feel like you're in a bit of a gilded cage if you're surrounded by amazing kit and a beautiful office space. It can almost kind of make you feel like you've already made it. And I think being somewhere scrappy with a bit more of a kind of startup culture kind of gives you more of that kind of grit and grind. However, because BagCheck was sort of initiated inside a fund. Did that mean you didn't have to go and do the kind of the typical fundraise? Did you already have the money in the bag? Or did you have to go run around Sand Hill Road and pitch and try and fill out the round?
We got a term sheet from folks that we were very familiar with, kind of based off of our time at Yahoo. And then we basically just took that term sheet to a couple places and said, hey, this is what we're doing. Would you like to be in on this round? So through that, it was a pretty straightforward process, right? I think the hardest part for a lot of entrepreneurs is getting that initial term sheet. And then once you have it, then it's so much more straightforward, right? Like, this is what we're doing. This is what it looks like. Would you like to participate or not? Then a lot of the early negotiation to figure out what that structure looks like. So if you can work with people that you know and trust at the very beginning, it goes a really long way. And the other funny thing about what we raised, this was, I don't know how many years ago now, like 15, maybe more. But we raised a seed of like 1.2 million, which at the time was like, whoa, that's a lot of money. And when we were acquired by Twitter, I think we still had like $1 million left because we took no salary. And so like our expenses at the time were just a little bit of office space. And at the end, we did have a couple employees, so we were spending a bit more. But just really, really lean and mean. And you look at some of these rounds now where the seed stage is in the hundreds of millions, right? And it's just such a different world.
I mean, incredibly capital efficient, which is amazing because you could have thought, having kind of got used to an executive salary, that you would have walked in and kind of been taken like a big paycheck. But it sounds like you were very capital efficient. I was just wondering, in terms of the raise, like back in the day, it was more common for founders to come from an engineering background or maybe a business background. You were a designer. Did you get any raised eyebrows or pushback? Or like, we're going to give money to a what now?
No, well, my co-founder was Sam Pilara, who's, to give you a little background, when we were at Yahoo, how did the two of us decide to go do this startup? So Jerry Yang had come back to be the CEO of Yahoo after, I think it was Terry Semel, who was the kind of media Hollywood guy that was in charge. So Jerry Yang came back, he was the original founder, became the CEO, and as part of his process of figuring out what to do with Yahoo, he started this weekly series of meetings where the different teams working on different products would come in and talk about what their plans were, what they had done, what they were going to do next. And the goal was just to sort of make sure everything makes sense. So in my role at the time, I was the chief design officer. So I was there representing product and design, and Sam was the acting CTO. So he was working for Ash Patel at the time. So Sam and I basically sat next to each other as all the different Yahoo products kind of got paraded through. And we realized at the time that we saw eye to eye on a whole bunch of these things and basically had a lot of the same type of reactions to what was going on. And so from that experience, we just kind of both came to the conclusion like, hey, we should go do our own thing instead of sitting here constantly like critiquing everybody else's thing. So he was very much deep on the technology side of the coin, right? So that gave us a lot of that clout. And frankly, he had a lot of relationships in the venture world already that we didn't have to rebuild. So he knew Peter Fenton over at Benchmark, which is how we just jumped right into the entrepreneur roles at Benchmark. It would probably been an uphill thing without his background in relationships. But I do think at the time, if you again kind of cast your eyes back to where we were, like that was the era of Web 2.0. And so product design was becoming a thing, right? People would look at Flickr and people would look at things like Jump Cut and all these other products, and they would recognize that design was actually playing an important role in what internet things should be, whereas before it was very much just, build it. So the tide was kind of turning there. Many companies were building up big design teams and all of that. So I don't think it was such a foreign concept that having I can't remember if user experience was a term back then or not, but like that having something that people could actually use and would want to use was a big deal.
Absolutely, I think you're right. I think the combination of your experience in one of what was one of the hottest tech companies at the time, and also your focus, having a really great technical co-founder, and you being really well known in the kind of the UX design space as UX was blowing up at the time, was probably a big sort of driver. And obviously, like you say, your colleague, your co-founder having really good network in the VC world, it seems like it was a no-brainer. We haven't talked about what Bag Check was. Could you just quickly give a quick intro to what the idea was, where it came from, and the problem you were trying to solve?
Yeah, again, I'll make another Web 2.0 reference. Like one of the things that we saw happening in a bunch of these places was people that were really into photography would like lay out all their photography gear. Here's my photo bag, here's my lenses, here's my cameras, here's the cards and everything that we had. And they would do this for like hiking, they do this for biking, they do it for all of these different things. It was kind of this like subgenre, if you will. And so we basically built a social commerce platform where you could show the stuff you use to do the things that you love to do and then find other people that would do the same thing. So for example, if I had this camera body and this lens, we would be like, oh, people that use that camera and this lens, 80% of them also use this third lens. And so you get like super interested in that, right? And as a result of that, we had like actually very, very high conversion numbers because that, again, think back Web 2.0, right? That social commerce kind of layer there was super important to people.
So obviously, at the time, sort of Flickr, the social object, was a photo that was shared. Twitter was coming up, and it was sort of a text object. And you were kind of sharing products, and obviously products are a great way to monetize. So you build a community around a bunch of products, and you could sell. So I totally get that. So is that why Twitter wanted to buy you, because they could see that, or was this an acqui-hire? Was this a purchase of the product, or how did that come about?
Yeah, again, everything is so contextual. So once again, I'm going to go back to like what was happening back then. Do you remember the fail whale?
I
The
do
fail whale
indeed.
was what would happen on Twitter every time it would go down. And there was a lot of fail whales back then. So the feed system that we built for bag check was really, really robust. Credit to Sam on this one. Like it was a super workhorse, right? And we also built a system that would completely separate the front end and back end from each other in a logicless way. And so That made the process of working extremely fast because we could kind of iterate on the business logic, if you will, of the application in this really dynamic and quick way. But it also made the service run incredibly fast because everything would get computed on the server, right? And then when we came time to render them on the client, like everything was blazing fast. And so a lot of the things that mattered to Twitter at the time was staying up, right? And being efficient and all that. And so when Twitter bought BagCheck, Sam actually went over there for, I think it was like a year and a half or so, and rebuilt their whole back end using a lot of the stuff that we had created at the time.
So, for a lot of founders, like a sale to a company like Twitter would be the outcome they were looking for. Other people, it could be quite challenging. Like on the surface, it looks like it's a great outcome. But maybe you had a journey ahead of you where you thought you were going to be building this business for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Like, I'm just kind of curious. Like, was that a difficult decision to make? How did it affect you emotionally?
Yeah, I think when you go start a company, unless your goal is to build a company, right? Like you have the wrong goal. If your goal is to go sell to Google or Twitter or whatever, right? Like then just go get a job over there, and work your way up to whatever equity thing you want. The goal is always to build a standalone business, but the reality is like that is damn hard, right? There's so few that pop up, even in the day today, right? If we look at AI, right? I can point to like OpenAI and I can point to Anthropic as probably sustainable new companies that have come up during this era. And then you have literally, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands at this point that will not, right? So it's very, very hard to do. And you hit these points where reality sinks in and you have forks in the road, right? And so with BagCheck, there's a whole bunch of other stories I can tell about it. We also had a CEO for a while, Brian Lamkin, who ran Adobe's creative suite at Adobe. So he talk about big executive dropped into a startup environment. There was a lot of lessons learned on that one. But we had, tried a bunch of different things, gone a bunch of different directions. And what you get is you just get these kind of inflection points where you're like, okay, we could either continue to do this, or we could change and do that, or we could go down this road. And oftentimes one of those options is, like, okay, do we try to sell the company? Or, hey, somebody's really interested right now. Is this the right moment to try and sell it? And so I just think about those things in that kind of mind space, right? The goal is always to build a standalone thing. Because ultimately, like, what's going to be the most fun? If you have a company that you build that, you can kind of guide and shepherd into what you believe it should be, or going back to the Yahoo massive spreadsheet 500 line thing, right? Knew what that world was like, wasn't necessarily jonesing to get back into it. But like I say, you hit these forks in the road and these decision points, and you make the right decision that you think at the time is the best path forward.
So you kind of go through this all again a couple of years later, don't you? So you now start to build out Polar. So how did Polar come about?
Yeah, I basically wasn't done doing startups, and I didn't go over to Twitter, didn't take the offer, just basically did the same thing that I did when I left Yahoo. Was I had run down that bank account, not completely, but fairly well, and then I took the kind of earnings from Twitter, put it in a bank account. I was like, okay, here we go again. If this comes down to zero, then I'll have to do something else, but we're going to go give it a run. And so Polar was, at that time, we had kind of been moving out of Web 2.0 and into mobile. And at the time that we made that transition over to Twitter, like this was when native apps were actually becoming a viable thing, and the internet was changing yet again. So what I wanted to do with Polar was really take things that we know people do and rethink them for the mobile era to make them way more efficient, better, more fun, more useful, and those kinds of things.
So Compared to bag check, what do you do differently with Polar?
Uh, well, obviously, the big focus on mobile was a pretty big one, but learned an awful lot from how we built out BagCheck. And in BagCheck, like one of the big lessons, well, there's a couple big lessons. So number one, the very first version of BagCheck, pre-Pinterest, was actually a bookmarklet, right, in a web browser that would just basically allow you to like pin pictures of products and you just get pictures. There's nothing else, right? And so this was pre-Pinterest and it was basically kind of the mechanism Pinterest used at the beginning to take off. So we built that out and then we went and talked to VCs and the feedback was, well, this isn't deep enough, right? Because this is the Web 2.0 era. And in their heads, they kept coming back to things like Yelp, right? And they're like, the way Yelp builds value is they have these big, deep reviews with all this information. They create this catalog, and that's where, they're building kind of their, moat or whatever word you want to use. And so, we got a lot of that feedback, and that was what pivoted us a little bit inside of BagCheck to now make these lists of objects where you would outline like how you use them and why you use them. So it was a lot more upfront work to create the lists that you had of the stuff that you use. But theoretically, it would have created, more downstream value at the expense, though, of super lightweight gestures to get things going. And so that was deeply in my head was like, I think that was a screw up, meaning I fundamentally believe like being extremely lightweight and easy to use was a huge part of what we should have done and continued to do. And so that was at the core of what we did with Polar. And then the other part there that we learned was when we did BagCheck, we did like no press, no PR, no talking about it. We were of the mindset like we're going to build something and the value of it is going to communicate, right? And for example, Sam had a good relationship with Kara Swisher, who at the time was like the press person, right? And like we never did anything with her. Never published an article, never went and talked to her about it, nothing. Like we just put our heads down and worked. And so when I did Polar, right, A, it was shift to mobile. B, it was coming back to my original thesis of we need to make something super fast and easy. And then 3, like we actually got out there and did a lot of, I don't want to call it publicity, but marketing, talking about what we're doing and actively using those channels to try and grow the product.
I mean, I think a lot of designers, a lot of founders in general, have this sort of if you build it, they will come mindset. They know that the product is amazing. All they need to do is put it out in the world and it will be discovered. And it's amazing how rarely that happens. And so often it takes a second time founder to realize, okay, like the product isn't the be all and end all of everything. Actually, the positioning, the marketing, the sales is the thing that we really need to lean into. And so it sounds like that was a learning that you took from the first time around that you really leaned into in the second time. I'm curious, is there, how do you change? Like, obviously, you'd gone from being a designer to an executive to now being a founder of a company. Like, was there like a journey that you took personally? Like, what are the kind of things you found yourself doing as a founder that designer Luke would have hated?
Yeah, well, fast forward to what happened with Polar was we got into a mode where our path forward was so we created like a real-time opinion engine, which manifested itself as these like little visual polls that people would vote on, this or that, who do you think's going to win the game, and all this kind of stuff, right? And the core driver of use for that is we had contracts with USA Today, with Hearst Publishing, it's like 17 Magazine and all these places where they would embed polar polls on their articles and people would say what they thought about each of the topics inside of those articles. And so what the path forward looked like for Polar at the end there was working with a bunch of publishers and entities, like drafting contracts, doing the negotiations, kind of customizing the product for them. And that all fell on me. And so again, we hit kind of this inflection point where I'm like, okay, Do we continue just basically scaling this business? Because we knew what it looked like. We had repeated it enough times where I could say, all right, we're going to go to a publisher. Here's what we're going to offer them. These are the metrics we're going to use. This is the relationship we're going to have. Here's the work we're going to do. And if we wanted to keep doing that, right, it would be an awful lot of basically business development work. And me being CEO, like I was the one negotiating, writing the contracts, reviewing all these things, right? And I don't like doing that. So I like making things. I like making products. That's why I was in the game to begin with, right? And so that was a very, very clear example where my personal, value add and interests were not aligned with where the company had to go. Now you could say, oh, you should just go hire a sales team and all that stuff. But now I'm managing a sales team. And you're like, okay, well, you hire a head of sales. Now I'm managing a head of, right? Like it just keeps going down that path.
I think what you're describing again is a really common one. Like if you're an engineer, you start a business because you want to do amazing code and architecture. If you're a designer, you want to build an amazing product. You end up kind of like for the first maybe 6 months or a year, really leaning into the thing that you love. But very quickly, as soon as rubber hits the road, as soon as you launch, actually you have to rely on the rest of the team to do that. And you are having meetings with the VCs. You are hiring marketing people and running a marketing team. You are having to go and do sales and pitches. And very quickly, the thing that you wanted to do more of and you loved stops being your main job and starts being your secondary job. And either you dismiss that, lean into the product stuff, and then maybe the growth doesn't happen, or you end up doing more and more and more of the stuff that you really hate and can quite, if you don't become an executive and a business person rather than a designer or product person, you end up being quite resentful for it. So I think this is a challenge that a lot of founders, even if the company's being successful, they struggle to make that transition. So yeah, I really hear you there, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are going through some version of that experience themselves. So how did the Google acquisition come about then?
Yeah, well, again, we hit this kind of inflection point, right? Where I was like, okay, this is the path forward. Let's see what other paths there are. And so one option would be pivot, try something else. At that point, we had been going pretty hard down this path and iterated a lot to get to something that was working, right? And we had something that was working. So the appetite to like try again from not zero, but right, like try and find another avenue, like wasn't as exciting. And then the third option was, okay, well, maybe we find a home for this. And so had a couple conversations again with Yahoo at the time. Um, a funny story about meeting Marissa, and she was CEO at the time, and walking away from that one. But I had, again, folks at Google that I had worked with in the past that knew me, that knew what we did. And they were actually, after the acquisition, I learned they like had an internal project where they were like basically building the same thing. And so stars kind of aligned with that one. And when we looked at, A was the business development path, option one. B was the kind of, try and make something new again path. Or the third one was let's go over to Google and work with some old friends and basically like scale what we built in a way where there are all these different supporting roles and we don't have to worry about it. So we picked that. And at the time, this was again historically an era where Google was very, very innovative and very meritocracy focused. So you could pop in. This was the age of like, 10 chat apps at Google, right? So you could go in and build whatever you liked, how you liked. So that was the best option on the table, and we went down that path.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's always interesting. I wouldn't imagine you'd want to sort of speak into the details, but a lot of the times, company acquisitions are because something is sort of stalling and it's a good way to kind of land somewhere new. Sometimes company acquisitions are because a competitor wants to take a competitor off the table. Sometimes it's around talent acquisition. There are lots of reasons why acquisitions happening, and what is on paper isn't always the real story, and it can be quite crunchy. And I'm sure as a VC, you've had to navigate some sales. Some of them are good and positive, some are a little bit challenging. So it can be quite an emotional time. I'm curious, like, if you had another stab at like either at Bagcheck or Polar, like what would you do differently?
Well, I'm doing it now. So basically, Sutter is a company that builds companies. So we internally have any number of projects that we're building with people in residence, entrepreneurs in residence, designers in residence, engineers in residence, right? And we do way fewer deals than other VCs of our, like your typical kind of big VCs in 50 or so things a year. We're in the single digits. So we put a lot of time and effort into each one of them. And like the amount of things I have learned about what it takes to actually build a company from zero to something that is substantial enough to matter is an endless list, and I keep learning more. But the nice thing about the way we operate is we kind of see it across a bunch of different companies. And so the ability to apply a lesson is just so much faster and easier. I'll give you like a very simple, tangible example. So we have this company called Rev, which builds their own image models and is effectively like a creative suite of tools for folks. And when we did our first launch roughly a year ago, within minutes or hours, there were hundreds of copycat sites where they bought up all the domains around Rev and basically put like a fake website up that still did image generation through some who knows what kind of models and had a little pay thing to go up there. And we're like, holy crap, right? So we really had to scramble to like take some of these down and so like a very small example, but we were launching another product maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, and I basically can go over there like, hey, we should buy up every adjacent domain because it's going to be so much cheaper than what we just had to go through with Rev, right? And so like all of those lessons really start to compound
Mm.
because then different companies learn different things, and you can really have a perspective on like we got to do all of these things. I mean, sometimes it's still not enough, right? It's obviously it still remains very, very difficult, if not more so these days with the amount of activity happening out there. But I still go back to the thing that drew me to startups at the beginning, kind of what I mentioned,
Mm.
taking me out of Yahoo was just that like learn, rapid learn, launch and learn kind of mentality is your lifeblood within a startup. And when you've got multiple startups, that funnel is even wider, right? You're learning across multiple things at the same time as opposed to just one that you're focused on.
Are there other patterns you see? Are there things that when founders come to you that they're regularly getting wrong or putting too much or too little effort in? Like, what are the kind of the key things that you're having to have conversations with your founders to kind of point them in the direction, talk them off the edge of the windowsill? I'd love to hear.
Yeah. I don't think it's possible to talk them off anything. And the example I always use is, if you haven't had kids and you are about to have a kid, I'll say, oh, it's really important that you keep them well fed or they're going to be grumpy. You're like, okay. And then later, you got a hungry kid, they're screaming at 2 in the morning. You're like, oh, I should really, like, unless you have that learned experience, you just don't take advice. It doesn't matter how many companies I've started and built or whatever. It doesn't matter to you unless it happens to you. So the approach that I currently take is like work with people, demonstrate what good looks like, right? Demonstrate the kinds of reactions you should. I'll give you another super tangible example. Working with one of our companies that's in the AI for coding space, and I find there's like this feedback list from people that had been emailing us feedback for like multiple weeks, and nobody had touched this list. So I'm like, give me the list. I'm going to email every single one of these people personally. And I'm going to, talk to them and understand what they're trying to do and how to do it, right? Because every single person that takes the time to send you a note about what you're doing and why they like it or they don't like it, and if it goes into a vat, it's like the worst. But if they get a response within hours or they get a response within a day, they even if they don't like what you're doing right out the gates, they now like you. And so again, it's a small thing, right? But it's this kind of like cultural piece. And when I say I'm going to show, I could tell them hey, it's important you respond to feedback. Okay, whatever, right? But instead, I take it on personally where I'll go through every single one of those things and write them, right? And then the people that see that are like, oh, maybe we should be doing that. Why is he doing this?
Well, I was going to say that's really impressive. That's really hands on. I mean, I have a somewhat similar approach, but it's also vaguely different because I'm spread across possibly a lot more portfolio companies. But effectively, when people ask me for advice, I'm happy to tell them about all the things that are likely to go wrong and to happen. It's very rare that the founders will then immediately listen to me and kind of enact my recommendations. But what I'm hoping for is they'll start to kind of feel the pain maybe 6 months later. And then they'll remember the conversation like, oh yeah, Andy had a really good point about that. And I didn't necessarily listen to him, but I'll go back and chat to him now. And once they've felt the pain, they're much more likely to go, oh, well, let's try and implement that advice. And so again, it's almost, to use your kind of like child rearing analogy, like you can tell a child not to touch a hot plate until you're blue in the face. It's only at the point where they burn themselves, they're like, oh, I better now listen to, Andy, because I don't want to get burnt again. And so it's that kind of, you've got to let people make their own mistakes. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if this makes you feel worse, but like, I don't know if they actually come back and be like, oh yeah, Luke said that. It's more that when they enter that situation, like in many cases, we've already kind of done some things that prepare them for it, if that makes sense, right? And so you mentioned the words hands-on. Yeah, my job is insanely hands-on, right? Like I am literally pushing pixels, I am writing marketing copy, I'm responding to emails. This morning I was providing feedback on a promotional video where I'm like screenshotting things and guiding stuff. I went out and had one of our EAs like find specific costumes for a marketing video that we're doing, right? Like, so way, way, way deep in the weeds. Making slides, right, for another one of our companies that I just rewrote their sales deck. And I did that by like combing through all of the customer meetings that they recorded and kind of finding what are the things that are actually salient and then writing them into a deck. And all this is, again, to like demonstrate and to basically be there in the trenches with them. By being in the trenches and doing things a particular way, right? It's such a stronger signal of like my conviction for it and my belief in that it matters, right? They're like, Luke is writing the sales deck. Why is he doing that? Right? And instead, I could be like, oh, you really have to start sales decks with the customer problem. Okay, right? Like I can kind of like spew out these truisms of things that I've learned over the years and I know matter, right? Like that actually is something I would believe in. Like you should start out with what the kind of problem is that you think these people are having and that you solve so that you basically like pre-qualify people before you even get through the rest of the deck. Like, is this a real customer for us or not? So like real thing you should do. And again, I can go and tell people, you should do that, you should do that, you should do that. But instead, if I go through the process with them, right, and do it, it's just a whole different ball game in terms of them internalizing it and embracing it and making it work than, right, like, advice giving.
I mean, that's fascinating. Most of the people I know who are operators that have gone into VC, who are like design partners, it's more sort of akin to the model that I am also using as well, which is much more advice driven. Like I will have a call with my founders every week or every few days or whatever. They will show me decks. I will give them feedback. Occasionally, I might go in and write some kind of like outbound email scripts. So I might do a little bit of work, but mostly because I'm spreading myself across like a dozen or 2 dozen portfolio companies, it's more little snippets of advice. I act more like an advisor. And most of the kind of the design partners I meet are the same. But in some of the bigger companies, I'm meeting design partners, much like you're saying, where they're actually doing design work, they're doing product work, they're much more hands-on. They are a resource, an unbillable resource that you can kind of utilize. And I guess, like, I presume that in the early stages, you're much more hands-on. Then as they start scaling, you maybe sort of scale back. Like, how many people are you? How many like portfolio companies are you supporting at any one time?
We're a little under 30, like total in the portfolio, like overall, right? And then in terms of the ones that we have around the office that are in earlier stages, that number is a little closer to 10. But even our companies that are scaled to thousands of people, like still doing projects with them and still interacting with them in a very similar kind of way. I have a team here that is composed of some designers, AI researchers, engineers, user researcher. And so like we're using those resources and kind of constantly looking at what's happening, what areas of need do specific companies have at a specific time, and either like swarming there or, balancing across a bunch of different projects. Because what you find is, again, to come back to my conversation about inflection points, there's points that really matter for companies where like putting several additional pushes can go a really, really long way at that specific point in time because of where they're at. And you need to have this kind of broader experience to know when that is, right? So sometimes it's intuition, but sometimes you just like smell the same pattern.
I think that's a fascinating model. I mean, I think at Camp we might have kind of 100, 120 portfolio companies per fund, and we might be, looking after two or three funds at any one time. So it's a much bigger volume play. I think with you, like if you're looking after 30, maybe there are 10 on site. You have the ability to kind of give much more higher level of service, and I love the model of building out a team. It's not a venture studio, but there's almost an element to that, which is like we have design expertise, we have marketing expertise, we have product expertise, and we can assemble a team and we can give that to you for an amount of time that you would not be able to kind of find otherwise. And so that is a really kind of high quality, high touch offering. And I'm sure it's really fun for you as well because you're like you say, you're rolling your hands up and you're in the weeds. It's not just from an advisory position.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it unless you really want to work, right? And want to work comes from a couple different things, right? You're either driven through something, or frankly, you like find it fun and rewarding,
Mm.
right? If you go back to kind of why I left the big company world to go do startups, is because I just love the process of making and learning things. And so for me, this is just like a scaled version of that because I'm doing it across a much wider set of things instead of one company. I'm doing, maybe roughly like 10-ish at a time or 6-ish at a time at any point. But it is a lot of work. And this is why I think most folks on the investment side do it the other way, right? Because like getting your hands that deep for that long takes an awful lot of energy. Startups are like roller coasters, period, right? So you're like riding 10 roller coasters simultaneously, which would make a lot of people throw up, to, to be kind of
It's
blunt.
emotionally
Unless you love
exhausting.
roller coasters, right? If you love roller coasters, then it's the best thing ever. I'm riding 10 of them at the same time.
I'm curious, like, are you involved in investment decisions? Do you come in a little bit later? And if you're not involved, or maybe even if you are involved in investment decisions, what stage are people coming to you? Are they coming to you with a already working product? Are they coming to you with customers? Are they coming to you literally with an idea? Is it more your experience of being in the IR where people just come and spend time in the office and the product emerges? And I'm less kind of interested in how it works, particularly with your fund, but more like what advice you can give founders at the moment as to the level of product they need to be showing to VCs in order to have a chance of raising funding.
Yeah, the answer is always we focus. So I this is what we do and what I believe. I believe that finding the right people is hands down the most important thing, right? So when we have in residence folks, those are people that we want to build companies with or around. And that is an extremely high bar. Like the amount of people that you could think of that could become a CEO of a large scale business is, infinitesimally small. The amount of people who are doing, next level breakthrough research inside of things like image models, the list is infinitesimally small. And so, I think the right evaluation, at least from my personal belief, and also sort of extends to our ethos, is like find those specific people and work with them And then a lot of the other stuff, right? This is where our me knowing about X, Y, and Z can help them on that side. Or, we can help them with all these other things that we've learned through the years of building companies. But like a lot of people over fixate on the idea, right? Oh, I got this idea. Don't steal my idea. Is that your, like, I don't, whatever. 1,000 people had the same idea you just had. So that's not really interesting.
And there's a really good chance that the idea will change. I mean, again, like so many companies, like they start out in one direction and then it's not the thing that they launched that was the value, but there was other value hidden. And so the one thing that retains is the team, the talent, the founders. And so I think absolutely investing in amazing founders and giving them support they need, the idea will come. And if it does pivot, you're there to support them. So it
Yeah,
sounds like very much you in that talent space.
it either will come or it won't come. It's not, there's nothing guaranteed. And if there was a repeatable formula, every single person would be doing it, right? But ultimately, you are making a bet on other human beings. And those other human beings have a really, really hard job, right? This is again where kind of having the experience building companies from nothing to something helps you a ton because you know what you're asking people to get into, right? You know what the ups and downs and the time commitments and all those things look like. Right. And I think it also gives you just a much better filter on talking to people. And if I'm being candid, honestly, right, like what happened with COVID and what's happened with kind of big company, uh, I don't want to call it perks, but like comfort levels have really reset people's expectations of what pushing hard and trying to create something new entails. Right? Folks like, okay, well, I'd love to come and work with you guys, but is it okay if I'm, in the office like once or twice a week? I'm like, no, we make like the 10 to 20 decisions a day in the very early stages of things, right? Um, and so I just think there's like an expectation gap that's emerged more recently. Like if I go back to when we were doing startups like Polar and Bag Check, it was like, yeah, we're gonna go hang out in a crappy garage and we're going to bust our ass for a while because we love it, right? To your point, you start out because you want to you it's your passion, it's what you want to do, right? And so you get in there and start cranking. It's not meant to be a comfortable situation, and the more comfortable you want it to be, the less real in terms of what actually you need to do, the less reality, right? Check is there. And I'm not trying to be a hard ass or anything, but like you can do what you like in life. That's totally fine with me. Um, but you can't say, "Hey, I want this, but I also want this," whatever the cake and eat it too thing or whatever you want to analogy you want to use.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I'm curious, like you come from a design background. How important do you think design is now to success of startups? And are you finding that as the founders that come in and speak to you, are they quite savvy around design now? Is this something you still have to kind of coax them on? Or is it just like not even important to you? You've moved on to other areas?
I Again, it really matters on the domain and the point at which the company is, right? I think trying to have a blanket like this thing is always important all the time. In some cases, yes, in some cases, no, right? And sometimes it's a question of when, right? There are definitely some cases where like it's just hardcore technology. Can we even make a thing work that does X? Right? We're just down in the guts of a system or of some hardware or of some software, and it's all engineering and infrastructure work. And then there's also a phase where we really need to envision what we would even want engineering to look at. And that's very much a design problem. Like we're going to riff a whole bunch to find the experience we want, and then we're going to back the technology into it. And picking one of those two things and saying this is the way it always is, kind of again is not the right reality mindset. It's not how the world works, right? But and sometimes you kind of go back and forth between those two modes too, which is a very common thing.
I mean, I guess the reason I was asking that question partly is I meet a lot of people that come from a design background that have this very unshakable belief in the power of design. And often when that belief meets commercial reality, they often push back and they can really struggle to understand that it's not the most important thing in the world. At the same time, I meet a lot of founders that maybe don't have an understanding of the value it can deliver. And so I guess coming from someone that has a unique standpoint, that comes from a design background, is in VC, has run their own startups, like how you make sense of the value or overvaluation of design that we're experiencing at the moment.
If I'm being transparent, most of the quote unquote design work being done in these big companies is not actually design work. It's like design for approval or, process management or whatever the heck you want. So a lot of people's brains have been conditioned to that is what design is. And when you apply that, like I could make the argument that's not very valuable. In fact, in many cases, it's pretty damn detrimental. But when I kind of come back to the core of let's envision what this thing could be for who, and we're gonna like really put in the time and thought process and think conceptually and right, like do like real design work. Imagine you don't have to meet with anybody, right? Or there's no process or anything. There's no design system or all these other things that kind of jump in there, right? Then that's extremely valuable. Like it helps define what the company could be for who and how. It's like hugely valuable. So, it depends on what people's perception is of what it can do. And sadly, many people's experience with design is more the former than the latter because the latter is so rare. Again, it comes back to like that tiny infinitesimal set of people who can make or break a company. That could be a designer, that could be an engineer, right? That could be a CEO. But they like really, really are so exceptional that they can drive the whole thing.
I mean, I think a lot of design in large companies, you are shipping incremental improvements from a pre-existing design system, from a PRD that's been written by somebody else. And in that environment, design is basically being a Figma operator in a lot of instances, and you're not adding an awful lot of value. And then on the other side, there are many people who come from a design background, but also an engineering or product background or a founder background who are using a way of thinking of solving problems. And I think that's what you're bringing to the table. You are bringing a problem solving capability that you might or I might call design because that's where we come from, but somebody else might call it something different. But it's really that kind of understanding of user needs, understanding of business needs, understanding of context. And the problem you solve might manifest itself in an interaction or an interface element. It might manifest itself in a hiring solution or a go-to-market strategy or whatever. And it's that level. And I guess the reason I was just asking is because I could imagine that sometimes people might box you in from your background, but it sounds like your day-to-day is very varied and you're not just being boxed in as like, oh, it's Luke W., the guy that does forms and did mobile and, now works in venture. It sounds like you've got a much broader remit.
Thankfully, most people forgot all that. I'm so old that people are like, who are you again? Why are you here? And then every once in a while, someone's like, oh yeah, didn't you do like some mobile thing?
Brilliant. Just last question. Like, I think we're in a really exciting time at the moment. I think AI is changing the way that engineers build. It's changing the way that product managers build, designers build, founders build. Like, how are you starting to see that work its way into your portfolio companies? Like, is the pace accelerating? What advice are you giving people around this space?
Yes, yes, yes to all the things. I have again, since I just mentioned I'm old. I lived through the web, right? I lived through Web 2.0. I lived through mobile. I lived through many of these kinds of transitions, and so like I just see the same patterns, although at an accelerated pace. If you look at the companies that we are building now, like it is AI from the bottom to the top. I often say like AI begets more AI because you make it do this and you do this. And it's because like dropping in levels of intelligence into products makes a ton of sense in so many different areas. So yeah, everything is getting reshaped and rethought. And the best advice I have for people with this is like, you got to jump in. And this is where being in the weeds, as I mentioned earlier, is like so valuable because I can like go and talk to you about, okay, well, when you're doing a context management system inside this thing, you've really got to deal with X, Y, and Z, right? And that's going to manifest itself in the interface in this way. And I'm not just going to tell you that. I actually have like 3 or 4 built things where you can feel it and understand the impact and the difference. Um, and in particular, with the transition we're going through right now, like I say, it's at a scale and a speed unlike all the others. So the chance of it kind of moving faster than you're willing to is accelerated. And the only kind of remedy for that is to like hop in there and learn. It's back to my original thing, right? Like get in there and learn as fast as possible.
Look, it's been great catching up. It's been fantastic hearing about the journey you've been on the last few years. I remember you as a very prolific author, writer, blogger, talking about all of the latest kind of trends and changes in the industry. That feels like that hasn't abated. If people want to hear about your opinions of the direction of travel, like where is the best place to kind of follow you?
Yeah, I'm Luke W at all the old school places, the blog, the Twitter, the LinkedIn, no TikToks, but everything else.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Likewise.
Brilliant. And to everybody else who's listening, thank you for tuning into the Design VC. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like, subscribe, leave a review, share it with someone you know that really cares about the intersection of design, startups, and venture. And until next time, I've been Andy Budd. See you soon. Bye.